This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
Oh, that worked out well. Going to work on Thursday, expecting I was going to be teaching later that night. Turns out that everybody decided this would be the week to go on vacation. And no one told me. I mean, I guess it is the first week of August. I just kind of expected most families to be done with vacation by now. I mean, come on, the school year is starting soon. I mean, my family's traveled the first week of August. It's my mom's birthday on the 7th. So it's one of those things where we'd kill two birds with one stone. Do the vacation trip and celebrate mom's birthday in one fell swoop. Nowadays, we're old, cranky, tired, and we work with children. No, I had to throw that last bit in there. Now, for the little bit of traveling I did back in June, that was probably enough for another 6 years. That round trip to Kentucky and back was quite the experience. If you're not used to interstates in Kentucky, good luck. The road construction logic down there is minuscule. Whoever designed Kentucky roads are the same folks that discovered the Rosetta Stone. So, yeah, I'm out one day in the month for teaching. Bummer. Luckily for me, after I got off, I got home early enough to sit down and watch Dynamite before the butt crack of dawn. Whoopee. And Tony made sure to deliver. He said, "Oh, Tommy's getting off early this week, huh? Let me make sure I book a worse than normal Dynamite program. Just to send him into a frenzy." Didn't disappoint, my friend. Didn't disappoint. I only had to pause the show once to drown my sorrows in booze. But when I looked up at the clock and realized that I was actually going to get through the show before 8 o'clock, it was relieving. And let's see here. I think the retro shows for this week were pretty status quo, right? Ooh, actually I just remembered. Yeah, that NWA Crockett show. That one was an oddball. More so than normal. There really wasn't any give and take in the middle. It was either fantastic promo material from all the top guys, or why in the heck did they book this squash match? Who on earth thought it would have been a good idea to book Sean Royal in a singles match? And we'll get to that. And then there's World Class, which is a whole different world entirely. That show, it's just, I don't even know at this point. The historians will typically tell you that the dark period for Dallas was anywhere from like 85 or 86 onward. Maybe that's the tipping point. But I'm telling you, man, I'm watching these Dallas shows in 84. I'm seeing a lot of red flags waving off right now. A lot of this stuff I'm either seeing for the first time ever or watching in full context after clips I've watched over the years. It's going to be one of those shows this week, just to let you know. I'm full of piss and vinegar this Friday, ready to rant up a storm as we get going with things. If I seem a bit more salty than normal, it's because I probably am. All right. Let's blast through this dumb show. I was just skimming through my notes before I sat down to do this thing. God, this show sucks. Fucking horrible, dude. This show's so horrible. Is it time for me to do another one of my annual 20-minute rants about how bad Dynamite is? At this point, I don't even think it's worth the breath. For as long as I've been reviewing this show, now there was that one brief period from like late 2021 to early 2022 when things were okay. Funny enough, right around the same time a certain individual debuted in the fall of 2021 and turned things around for a brief window. Yeah, for the life of me, drawing a blank. Can't remember who that guy was. Maybe it was somebody important. I don't know. What I do know is that whether or not this is the 50th Dynamite, the 100th Dynamite, or the 200th Dynamite, it's still Dynamite. And they can try and celebrate their 500th episode of Dynamite like it makes any difference. Trust me, it doesn't. They just throw up a graphic and make it seem like it's important. And of course, the format for the show is no different than every other standard show we see on Wednesday. There's no special match booked, no big segment planned, nothing to make the show seem important. Just the announcer saying, it's Dynamite 200. And somehow I'm supposed to care. So anyway, the opener was Chris Jericho and Takeshita versus Sammy Guevara and Daniel Garcia. So apparently that JAS breakup was not a dick tease. No, they actually broke up the JAS in that random 30-second backstage pre-tape that I glossed over the other week. That was it. That was the end of them. What a payoff. It's great because during Jericho's entrance, they put up the split screen to show the previous incarnations of all of Jericho's factions in AEW. They had one for the Inner Circle, and then they had one for the Jagoff Society. And I'm looking at the screen, seeing old footage of Jericho from 2 years ago when he looked like a fucking Brugger's bagel. He's like 20 pounds heavier. His face is completely bloated, paler than a ghost. And then you see him with the JAS when he actually tried to hit the gym and tan more than once a month. It's night and day. It was also funny seeing Santana and Ortiz in the shot for a few seconds. Remember those guys? Whatever happened to them? They just fell off the face of the earth and vanished. Wasn't Jericho supposed to help establish those guys as a main event act in AEW? What happened to that? And then there's Sammy. After like 2.5 years of him riding Jericho's coattails, all those subtleties of him splitting away from Jericho and going babyface, now they're just doing the blow-off in a random tag match on Dynamite in the opener with no build-up. Gee. You think they could have maybe saved that and try to make some money off of it for a big event? If only AEW had one of those coming up. And look, I'm not trying to bury Jericho here. He's not a spring chicken anymore. I get it. But he looks so horrible in this match. Slower than I've probably ever seen him. He's like barely able to feed for Garcia or Guevara. I can hardly call it rope running a lot of the time with him. It's like casual stroll through the park jogging with the way he hits the ropes. He looks like those soccer moms with big jiggly tits that also try to walk their dogs and babies at the same time, thinking they're actually doing proper exercise when all they're doing is killing the kid at a faster rate. So eventually Guevara gets the hot tag, runs wild for a minute. And by that, I mean both teams did simultaneous cold tags at the same time to take a shit in Guevara. So it wasn't a hot tag at all. Take a shit completely fucked up a Walls of Jericho at one point, which Excalibur perfectly timed by saying he calls that the Walls of Takesha. So the move is him purposefully screwing up Jericho's submission hold. Sounds about right. They do about 1,500 false finishes in the last few minutes. Guevara nearly killed Take a Shit with that shooting star press out to the floor. Cracked him right in the face with his elbow. Because they're all goddamn idiots in this company and don't care whether or not they paralyze anybody, including themselves. And while Garcia had Jericho in the sharpshooter, Don Callis snuck around and hit him with a baseball bat. I have no idea what Aubrey was doing. Picking her nose, scratching her ass, or sinking through the ring mat like a video game glitch. But she apparently didn't see Don interfere. At which point, Jericho then looked at Callis and screamed, and I quote, "What the fuck?" to the top of his lungs. Now, of course, it's AEW, so they missed the censor function. And then Jericho stole the pin anyway. So, yeah, good. Very good. Glad to know we sacrificed the Guevara-Jericho singles program so that instead of elevating Guevara and trying to get one of their alleged 4 pillars back on track, instead they're using one of said 4 pillars as a story pivot to get over Chris Jericho in 2023. Because after all, it's more important to keep Chris Jericho relevant in 2023 than it is to get one of their younger homegrown guys over. Regardless of whether or not I like him, it doesn't matter. I can't stand Sammy Guevara. I think he's a fucking idiot. But the point still stands. And of course, all the Jericho nuthuggers are going to defend it. It's like how the left-leaning mainstream media covers the Biden administration. We're just never allowed to speak ill of the wrongdoings. We're just supposed to sit there and pretend like all the bullshit happening in front of our faces is just an illusion, despite all evidence to the contrary. So yeah, this all sucks. I don't care about the Callis Jericho shit. They totally wasted Guevara and Garcia here to push the story forward. I actually didn't even think about it until just now. Wasn't Garcia part of the JAS too? Yeah. So not only did they use Sammy as a plot device, but they did the same to Danny Garcia. So they both get the shaft. That's 2 burials for the price of 1. Holy shit. You really can't make this stuff up, can you? Well, thankfully Tony Khan was on camera next to give me a good laugh. After many hours of hearing Brian last do his Tony Khan impression, as soon as Tony opened his mouth and the first words I heard were, "Thanks, guys." Oh, Christ. I just couldn't help myself. I immediately burst out laughing. It's like clockwork. If I hear Tony say, "Thanks, guys," or even better, "Hi," everything else that follows, I just can't take it seriously. It's too good. He's so incredibly awkward on camera. And like, I know that's probably something I should make fun of because, no, never mind. I say socially awkward. It's probably something a little more serious than that. The bottom line is, he shouldn't be doing these segments because it just makes you cringe every time you see him talk. Even more cringe than that, they end up showing a Best of AEW highlight reel to celebrate their 200th episode, which ironically enough was probably a montage of the worst of AEW in a highlight reel. It's okay. They only showed Cody on camera maybe 17 times throughout the minute-long video. But they also showed us garbage, such as the parking lot brawl with Trent and Chucky Finster, including the classic minivan angle with Trent's mom, the garbage street fight that Dave Meltzer gave 5 stars because he's a fucking tool. They showed the Britt Baker bloodbath match where it looked like she ran herself through a razor blade factory. They had the Matt Hardy teleportation garbage thrown in there. Football fuckery, I think, got an honorable mention. I'm not kidding. It was legitimately like they sat down and said, okay, what is all the worst possible footage we can compile to perfectly exemplify all the bad shit about AEW? Let's use that stuff to air out for our 200th episode celebration. Everything that's given this company a bad rap, let's feature that. Every rotten angle and match we've ever done in our 3-year history, throw it in. Some things never change, do they? So then we had Tony Schiavone bring down Ludwig von Perry for an interview. This segment also sucked a wet cock. But I wanted to throw that out there before I go into my big tangent later on. Anyway, last week, they did the deal where Jerry Lynn confronted Jungle Jackass. All of a sudden, Tony Khan was watching his old ECW tapes and decided it'd be time to rehash another one of these angles. Trotting out all the broken down, battered, out-of-shape ECW originals. Thinking the majority of them are in good enough shape to wrestle, much less move. Jerry Lynn's one of the few that actually looks like he's semi-mobile, but he looks like he's in pretty rough shape these days. So, of course, Jerry comes out this week and tells Jungle Boy, yeah, there's no way in hell the doctors are going to clear me to get back in the ring to compete, so I'm not going to fight you. But he called a good friend of his, and this guy so happens to still be wrestling to this day, where I have no idea. But he left out the part where he also mentioned he's also barely mobile at his age too, but he still needs the money apparently, so that's why he's still wrestling. And who should come out but Bob Van Dam, looking older than dirt and moving slower than a guy with hypokinesia. And of course, the whole thing's absurd because, Jungle Boy has to stand there and back away from him like a coward, pretending like he wouldn't be able to just cock block Rob and drop him where he stands. No, instead he has to back away like a chicken while Rob stands there looking like he's about to break into 2 pieces. And then while him and Jerry are high-fiving in the ring, Jungle Jackass runs back out with a chair. And this is where I just rolled my eyes and said, fuck this. He swings at RVD with a chair. Looked like he was doing it in slow motion. Probably to make sure Rob legitimately ducked it. Elsewise, Jungle Boy would have probably given him a shoot chair shot to the head. And Rob ducks. Kind of spin kicks Perry out of the ring. Perry hops over the guardrail and hides behind a 5-year-old girl in the front row. In overly comedic fashion. I also didn't mention that when Jungle Boy dropped the chair and powdered, Rob nearly tripped over the chair and wiped himself out. And, yeah, this all about sucked. Oh God, I don't even know if I ever talked about RVD on this channel before, have I? Oh, no, I did. No, I did that ECW pay-per-view recap last year in the spring of 2022. I think Rob wrestled on that card. And I sort of did a huge rant on how much I've always hated RVD's work. It's one of those things where a lot of it might reflect on the fact that he was an ECW guy for so many years. And I've been very outspoken about how much I hated ECW and how I thought it exposed and killed so much of the business. I know the AEW cult fan base has a special bond with ECW because a lot of that hardcore audience grew up on watching ECW. All right, whatever, fine. It's not my hill to die on. I understand. But I always thought ECW was garbage. And I've really doubled down on that opinion over the years, especially with seeing the mentality a lot of these newer generation wrestlers have. You know, the ones that grew up watching and idolizing that form of wrestling. And I use that term loosely. There was some wrestling in ECW, although it was quite sporadic. RVD, though, again, I know a lot of younger fans like him. In a way, he was kind of ahead of his time in terms of the athletic stuff he was capable of doing in the ring. He was agile. And then, of course, you watch it back and you realize just how stiff, jerky, and botchy a lot of RVD's offense was. And that's why I never understood the appeal. You know, he's a guy that's long overstayed his welcome in the business for me. God, I remember TNA had a ludicrous infatuation with that guy for years, pushing him way harder than what was warranted. You know, half the time the guy would show up for tapings either stoned or totally not giving a fuck. Most of his matches were the shits. You know, I always joke, you heard me probably talk about it a few times whenever I bring up Matt Riddle, how he and RVD are very similar in personalities, except Riddle's actually a good wrestler and a legit badass. You know, RVD is just a stoner klutz who was never all that good to begin with. You know, people just thought he was because he wrestled in ECW, and the competition was mid at best. Then there's this WWF run. God, that stuff was so long ago, I don't even remember a lot of it. I remember he wrestled John Cena in Philly in like the mid-2000s. Cena got vociferously booed out of the building by the hardcores. I think Rob actually came in right during that abomination that was the Invasion period. And that's when I legitimately stopped watching WWF for a couple years because I was so disgusted with the Steve Austin heel turn at WrestleMania, the whole alliance with Vince. I just stopped watching. So I actually missed the boat on RVD when he first came over. But, you know, my opinion of him never really changed. Never saw the appeal. Always thought the guy was incredibly overrated. And seriously, Bob Van Dam versus Jack Perry in 2023. Does anybody actually expect that to be a good match? Objectively speaking, even if for whatever reason you're like the biggest mark for RVD, can you at least be willing enough to acknowledge that match would blow chunks? RVD's what? Late 40s at this point? And like I said, just watching him come down the aisleway, he looked like death warmed over. The fuck is Jack Perry supposed to do with this guy? Can Rob even do anything physical anymore? Can he do any of his flashy offense? He can maybe hit an okay frog splash, which I think was his finish at one point, right? But all that other shit he used to do back in the late 90s, hardly he can do any of that anymore. At least not well. And what then? Is Jungle Boy supposed to overbump and oversell to try and get it over? That's just going to expose him and make him look stupid. Yeah, I don't get this at all. This whole thing is just a disaster. I don't know why Tony's doing it. You know, they brought in Sabu for that Jericho Cole match at the May pay-per-view. You know, that ended up being one of the worst matches in AEW history. Sabu was barely a factor at all, except for botching another table bump because he also sucks. Yeah, gonna be honest. This wasn't for me. I know I probably could have simplified that conversation down to that one quote, but that's basically what I got out of it. I probably spent more time talking about it than the actual segment lasted. And what do they say that match is happening next week? At least it's not happening in Wembley, because good Lord, if they actually were to go through and book that match at Wembley, God help the people in attendance that would have to watch that live. It's definitely a toss-up between that and the Jericho Cole match for worst match of 2023. And I haven't even seen it yet. I would have probably thrown this next match into the conversation poll. had I actually subjected myself to it. But on top of it being a completely random three-way for no reason, plus tacking on the unnecessary anything goes stipulation, plus the fact that it was a Jon Moxley match, that's a triple whammy. Yeah, I tapped out before Justin Roberts even got done with the ring intros. For those that care, it's AutoZone attendant Moxley versus Trent versus one of the Lucha fucks. Can't even remember which one, don't care. It went forever. They used a bunch of furniture. People got slammed onto thumbtacks and still kicked out of 2. By the grace of God, Mox did not gig himself. Probably didn't get the stamp of approval from Booker Khan this week. And, who won? Did I even write it down? Shit, I think I forgot to write it down. Who cares? Somebody won. And then there was a brawl in the crowd afterwards, because of course there was. Did I mention the show fucking sucks? And there were a couple other things I missed in here, but the next thing I started taking notes on was the MJF Adam Cole segment, so I'll just go ahead and talk about that. Well, first and foremost, we're still running with this placeholder baby heel MJF thing. I don't really know what else to call it. On the one hand, he does a good job coercing the fans into buying into the idea that he's a good guy. On the other hand, I don't think I can sit here and say that I've ever been the biggest fan of babyface MJF, whether or not he is working a gimmick. The whole sympathetic promo material always comes off really shady. Like when he's going and talking about getting bullied and pushed around as a kid, talking about being scared and not really knowing what it's like to be a decent human being until guys like Adam Cole help to show him the way. You know, he's out there being vulnerable. Again, it's so obviously phony. It's not believable. You can see right through it. You know, but at the same time, he's openly acknowledging that he's still a scumbag. How he's not going to flip gimmicks at the drop of a hat. Then the people are chanting, he's a scumbag. While at the same time, he's the biggest babyface on the entire roster. God, the whole thing is just so ass backwards. But the people are eating from the palm of his hand. And, well, after getting everybody to start an ADD chant again, you know, because it's funny making fun of people with mental disorders. Well, then he brings out Adam Cole, because he wanted to acknowledge him for all that he's done to help open MJF's eyes to the goodness of the world. Or something. It's so tongue-in-cheek. You know, Cole's out there telling Max that he's proud of him. That he's finally seen the light. That there really is a good guy underneath that black devilish physique. You know, he's doing this overly choreographed Dr. Seuss novel about how he's proud of MJF for recognizing that he doesn't have to be all scum. You know, at this point, I'm just waiting for them to flash rainbows and lollipops on the screen. And finally, Max tells Cole that, well, he's thought long and hard about their conversation. The one where MJF promised he would give Cole a title match for the Triple B. Win, lose, or draw. Didn't matter if they lost the tag title match against FTR. He was going to live up to his word. And, well, he tells Cole that he doesn't deserve a match. He deserves the match. The match of matches at Wembley Stadium. All in. So he hands Cole a contract, which Cole immediately signs without reading first, because he's a stupid babyface. And then he and MJF hug. Huh. So I assume the swerve comes at All In when we come to learn that Adam Cole has to now wrestle the match blindfolded or with one arm tied behind his back. You know, because he was stupid enough not to read the contract. That would be an interesting way for MJF to fuck him. But then again, we're back to the issue of Adam Cole being made out to look like a stupid babyface when all is said and done. Yeah, we'll see. I thought they should have considered rematching them with FTR for the titles since that Collision match was so good. But instead they're going this route. And, yeah, like I said, we'll see what they do. They showed Roddy Strong flipping his lid in the back afterwards. Still had the neck brace on. Can't get over that. But they are still leaving him in there as a third awkward wheel. So if they don't go with the obvious MJF swerves Cole and then manipulates the contract to get an easy match out of it, maybe Roddy factors in somehow. Maybe he fucks Cole over and they wind up splitting Cole away to feud with Roddy. That would leave room for MJF to go on and feud with Punk. They can always do that. It's not to say they're evidently going to fuck the story up. I'm advocating anything to avoid making Adam Cole look like a dimwit. That would work for me. Just don't make Adam Cole look stupid. Speaking of stupid and dimwits, they had a 6-man tag with the Elite versus Jay Lethal, Jeff Jarrett, and Satnam Singh. And this I had to see. Not purely for the comedy of seeing Satnam Singh try and work and feed for the Beta Bucks. I wanted to see how Double J would work with these slapnuts. If this match didn't push him harder to reconsider contract negotiations, I don't know what will. Now, if anything, it forced Omega and the Bucks to work a Memphis-style match for about 45 seconds. Double J ain't feeding for triple springboard moonsaults. That done work for him, brother. But let's talk about the real humor. The Beta Bucks and Satnam Singh. The fucking spot where Satnam hit the ropes and basically just turned and fell on the Bucks. Oh my God. I must have replayed that shit like 8 times. I was laughing so hard. The Giant is so immobile and flimsy, he can't even get himself 2 inches off the ground to leap up into the air and do a crossbody attack. So he basically just bumbles over and squishes the Bucks like bugs. It was gloriously hideous. And then Jared Lethal and Satnam did a spoof Elite pose, and I laughed even harder. Looking back, this might have been my favorite AEW match of all time. Any situation where the Elite are made out to look like bumbling morons, that is a win for me. So they come back from break and did some more indie-looking stuff until the predictable way too much shit going on dusty finish. 1,000 run-ins, hundreds of bodies getting strewn all over the place. Fucking Karen Jarrett. Of course she had to get involved. That horse face always manages to stick her nose in the middle of things and muddy it up. The Hardys were out there at one point for Christ knows what reason. Jarrett tried to use a guitar on Omega, but Adam Page flew in and hit a buckshot lariat to cut him off. Somehow the bald egg referee had to pretend like he didn't see it. And then finally Omega hit Lethal with a one-winged angel and pinned him. For about 50% of the match, it was train wreck level awesome. Just watching Satnam in there be a complete stock-still bus. The other 50% was just typical Elite overbooked bullshit. But of course they think it's good because they actually think they're good at their jobs. And then they all reminded us afterwards that they re-signed with AEW. Because apparently that was the thing worth mentioning on their television program. Like any casual fan is going to give two fucks about the Elite re-signing their contracts with All Elite Wrestling. I just want to know why that was a huge news bulletin in the last few days. Like, duh. Did anyone actually think these numbskulls were going to go anywhere else? After all the chaos and havoc they've wreaked in this company with splitting the roster in half, basically, forcing everybody to pick and choose camps over the last fucking year, you actually thought those guys were leaving? Really? Are people really that fucking dumb? Or am I just way too straightforward with my thinking? Like these halfwits had to think twice about re-signing with AEW. Are you kidding? What fucking planet are you living on? So after all that, we had basically what I coined a hodgepodge of bullshit. There was a weird skit where Swerve and his posse showed up in Nick Wayne's garage and beat the shit out of him. The only thing I jotted down was, don't you think it's a little early to be shooting angles with Nick Wayne when the guys had literally one fucking TV match? But I guess I'm doing a little too much critical thinking for AEW, so we'll just cut the conversation there. There was also a tag match with Aussie Open versus Commander and Vikingo. Because of course there was. And, Aussie won that. A couple collision VTRs that I didn't know much about. And then we had the main event. After that abortion that was Taya Valkyrie and Britt Baker the other week, it died a death on television, Tony Khan decided to reward the girls' division by giving them the main event TV slot a week later. Because that's Tony Khan logic for you. And after Toni Storm had been one of the most feckless, immaterial women's world champions in company history, to the point where I actually forgot that she even still had the belt, they decided that the situation was so bad that they had to dig out Hikaru Shida from the garage with all the box of Tony Khan's action figures so they could randomly flip-flop the belt onto Shida. After Shida had been gone for Christ knows how long, can't even remember the last thing she did on TV, much less the last time she actually wrestled. And now she's just showing up and beating Toni Storm, their alleged top female in the division. Now, on the scale of most women's matches I see in AEW, this was probably somewhere in the range of meh to okay. In comparison to Ty and Britt, this is fucking Rock and Hogan at WrestleMania. I didn't really care about it. I had no reason to care about it. Like I said, Shida hasn't been around forever. Toni Storm's been the awkward third wheel in a heel faction behind Ruby No-Go and Saraya. It was kind of just a rally of big offensive moves for a lot of it. As usual, Toni nearly killed the girl with a running hip attack in the corner. They did a sloppy 1-2 exchange until Shida dropped Toni with a Falcon Arrow. At which point, Saraya threw a kendo stick into the ring. And after Shida grabbed it and teased hitting Toni with it, she then turned and hit the other heels, of which the camera missed the shot on Saraya. And of course they do that stupid shit where after Paul Turner literally just watched Shida whack people with kendo stick shots to the head, he then casually grabs the stick and passes it off to somebody on the floor while pretending like he had to keep his back turned for 5 minutes so Toni could spray Shida with hairspray. Hits her with a stuffed pile driver for a 2 count. Because of course Shida kicks out of the pile driver. And they already killed the move by having the boys kick out of it, so you may as well have the girls do it too. And the finish is Shida just rolling up Toni in a cradle like 10 seconds later and pinning her. So there you have it. I mean, she got a big pop for the title win. Can't really say it didn't work. I don't know if the confetti was necessary. You know, we're celebrating the title win like the AEW women's title is a belt worth giving a damn about. Doesn't everybody in AEW have a belt? No, I guess everybody except Tony Storm now. Yeah. That was basically the entire second hour of the show in about 3 minutes of summation. The finish to the six-man with the Elite, the promo afterwards, an indie tag match that I skipped over, a couple pre-taped segments with other guys that I skipped over, and the girls' main event. I'm wondering how all that reflected in the ratings. I mean, they've been pretty steady with the audience. I mean, at this point, it's mostly the cult elitists watching anyway. So if there is a dip in viewership, it's not going to be much of a drop-off. But man, even going back and looking over this card again, like seriously, if you were watching this entire thing from start to finish, at this point, I don't know how you can't be a cult elitist. How do you watch all this? This is like bottom of the barrel in terms of the audience these people are trying to appeal to. I don't even know if I really understand the target audience. That's a scary thing. You know, some people probably got their ECW fix. You know, the ones that still cling to that company 22 years after it went belly up because it was a horrible product and had a small shelf life. But can you even argue that the rest of the show is appealing to indie fans? What fans of independent wrestling actually give two fucks about Commander or El Hijo Vikingo? And the majority of these cocksuckers. I'm just trying to figure out what I'm missing. With most of the green guys, it's not like they know how to do anything else but flips and sloppy dives. They all wrestle the same style. They're all interchangeable, generic-looking dweebs. Nobody stands out. And then when it comes to the Elite, you know, they're the prime definition of, you see one of their matches, you pretty much seen them all. You know, Kenny Omega, at least when he's paired with the right opponent, he's shown he can actually work a little bit. The Bucks are hopeless. Unless they're in there with FTR, who actively force those idiots to work a normal professional wrestling match. And we're really not making much progress with putting a card together for this Wembley show. And they got 3 weeks to sell intrigue on what'll probably end up being their biggest box office success they ever do in company history. And they're basically running this entire show solely based on the company brand name and nothing else. And again, that also has a shelf life. It's not sustainable in the long term if AEW is actually going to run Wembley every year to make it an annual thing. They might do well for the first year or two, but once people start catching on to the fact that the cards are shit and the matches are hastily thrown together with little context, the UK fans might not be as forgiving. You know, it's one thing to hotshot a bunch of angles and big matches all in one card, but it's another thing to not have a card at all. And AEW is still at that point. We have officially announced on the TV show, and I don't give a fuck what the dirt sheets or the rumor reports say. I'm talking about officially announced on the TV show. We have one match. MJF versus Adam Cole for the AEW World Championship, which most of us figured was happening anyway. Beyond that, nothing. Zip. So then the question becomes, how long do they keep operating under that business philosophy? How big are their egos? To think they'll be able to solely branch out to the UK market to run special events and pay-per-views in the next 5 to 10 years just by saying, hey, we're AEW, buy a ticket now. Like I said, it's special right now because the UK fans have never seen AEW in that international market. So there's a natural draw. They want to be a part of that experience. But if they run that same Wembley show every year for another 3, 5, 8, 12 years, however long this Tony Khan vanity project lasts for, that's going to be the difference maker. It's so easy to get hung up on the idea that everything's all good in the hood for now. But man, wrestling fans have a terrible ability to think long term. They never take into consideration the ramifications for bad booking and bad business models. Look what happened to WCW. Look what bad business management and bad business outlook did in such a short window. We've already seen a significant drop-off in interest for AEW's product in just 3 years. Since all the Punk drama, there's been a pretty steady decline in overall product intrigue. You know, the shows are basically split right now in terms of viewers, so it's a little more difficult to break the numbers down. But the Dynamite shows are doing nowhere near the numbers they were doing when Punk was hot, when Danielson was hot, when overall company morale seemed to be up. It's a different ball game we're playing right now. And I'm hoping Tony Khan understands the gravity of the situation he's put himself in. He's got two opposing parties trying to pull him in polar opposite directions. And while he's still trying to play peacemaker and be neutral with everything, the damage that's been done from the higher-ups are pretty substantial. And I'm not going to sit here and go into the debate of who's purely at fault. Punk has extended the olive branch. The Elite haven't taken it. It's probably never going to get fully resolved. That's probably just the way it is. And now Tony Khan's left to pick up the scraps. You know, he's got problems of his own when it comes to his contributions with the poor programming we see a lot of weeks. His booking sucks. He has no idea what he's doing. But because he has people lying to him and telling him he's doing a good job, he can't see past the smell of his own wet farts to have any other grasp. He's so locked into the idea that he's doing a good job. It's baffling. And I know I keep recycling the same talking points, but when the day comes when things really take a turn for the worse, you can come back to conversations like this and reflect on everything I've said about AEW's behind-the-scenes drama and how it's negatively impacted their TV programs. But enough about Tony Khan and all his problems. Let's move on to some other promotions that have some ongoing problems. Some of them come to the forefront more recently, but we're still in a relatively decent period with Crockett Promotions. And we're also a little more than halfway through the 87 Bash Tour at this point. And the one thing that's really stood out this year is the de-emphasis in video footage compared to last year's Bash. God, for reference, go back and check out some of the 86 Bash Tour shows we did last year. There's so much more content being shown on the TBS Superstation. Like this year, it's weird. We've gotten highlight spurts here and there. You know, obviously the big story for 87 was the initiation of the War Games match. I mean, that they've been promoting like crazy. But I remember there was so much more fanfare and excitement headed into last year's Bash Tour. This year is just kind of like, all right, we're at the 87 Bash Tour again. Cool. I mean, it's an interesting compare and contrast now that we're a couple years into the classic reviews, and we're seeing how the timeline has shifted from one year to the next. Still Crockett Promotions, but you're seeing those chinks in the armor becoming more and more present. On screen, everything looks hunky-dory. Behind the scenes, they're losing money hand over fist. It's a complete nightmare from the business side of things. And this is kind of where not having the internet around painted a different light on the situation. That we didn't have access to knowing everything that was going on behind the scenes with the network. The fact that they were blowing more money than what was coming in, losing their ass. And meanwhile, you watch the television program and as a fan and you're like, doesn't seem like anything out of the ordinary. Business looks strong to me. People seem to enjoy their jobs. No. It may seem that way, but the reality of 1988 is soon upon us, and that's when we'll start looking back at these shows in 87 and focus in on all the red flags that were being waved around. The biggest red flag was David Crockett's commentary. Nah, I'm being facetious. Although he was having a rather off day this week. More off than David Crockett normally is. Starting from the beginning as an example, as David opens the show by going, "Tony, let's talk about Lex Luger." And then he pauses for a few seconds to collect his thoughts. And he basically just says, he's huge, he's a United States champion, and he's accomplished a lot in a short period of time. That was the entire rundown. What a fucking recap. David Crockett, baby. The bringer of captivating storytelling. Let's talk about Lex Luger. He's big. All right then, Tony, on with the rest of the show. And that basically left poor Tony to carry the rest of the conversation. Talk about all the other bullet points that he needed to go over. God, it's one thing you don't think about that often, but leave it to Tony Schiavone to have to carry this show on his back. David Crockett was so clueless. Unbelievable. It's probably why they sent Jim Cornette out there to start the show. Dusty looked and said, "Coney, baby, David Crockett's laying an egg out there right now, Daddy. Why don't you go and do your thing and save the show? You know what I'm saying?" And, no. Cornette was definitely decked out for the occasion. He had the red, white, and blue apparel, talking about how great Independence Day is in August. He quoted his grandfather, Ulysses Cornette, the prominent speaker who delivered the memorable line, "Ask not what you can do for your country, but what your country can do for you." It is a very famous quote. And he ends up pitching it to our opener for the week. Midnight Express versus George South and Cougar J. Cornette spent the entire match burying all the babyface tag teams in line for the U.S. tag belts. It was borderline impossible to write anything down without freeze framing every 5 seconds. I do remember him referring to Ronnie Garvin here as the only homicidal, suicidal, genocidal maniac in the sport. Boy, if you only knew how quickly Sabu was coming down the pike. He also made fun of Dusty for not being able to speak English. That never gets old. It was awesome while he's jabbing back and forth with Tony and David, talking about how the Rock and Roll Express know they cannot beat the Midnights for the belts. Tony goes, "I don't believe that." Corny responds with, "Tony, would I ever lie to you?" And David Crockett, who, mind you, had not said one word the entire time up to that point, casually interjects with, "Yes." It's the best part of David's commentary. Randomly interjecting with snide remarks at Jim Cornette. The rest of the time, he just wants somebody to put a muzzle over him. Oh, speaking of great lines, Corny had another one here. While he's joking about the Mulkey brothers, he's talking about how they'd be qualified for a title match with the Midnights because George South and Cougar J, quote, ain't getting the job done. And then as an insider wink, he goes, "Well, they will be in a minute." I'm sure all the clever, smart fans appreciated that one. I also still like the ongoing TV story of Cornette trying to get Jim Crockett to sign off on a match with the Midnights and the Mulkey brothers. Even though they are currently ranked number 13 in the tag division, Cornette is insistent that those guys are the only team that could give Bobby and Stan a run for their money. The fucking Mulkeys. Amazing stuff. The Midnights hit a chiropractor crunch on Jay and then beat him with a flapjack a few seconds later. I wish the boys today would bring that move back. The chiropractor crunch. That was such a unique move with a cool name. Dax and Cash ought to take note. And then Cornette did a quick heat promo afterwards, putting over the Midnights. Bobby was standing there wearing wacky pink and blue sunglasses. Obviously to match his signature pink and blue ring gear that he had on this week. They look better on Stan. And I have no idea what the hell Jim said. He promised the Midnights would win the World Tag Belts back from the Rock and Roll Express. There was some more pro-patriotic verbiage in there that I neglected to jot down. But we all know that Cornette is the most pro-American babyface of all time. Then we came back for Jimmy Garvin versus Thunderfoot number 2. The Thunderfoots are one of the greatest ribs on these studio shows. It's an unsung mystery. Somebody woke up one day and said, "No, we can't just have one Thunderfoot on this program. We need 2." So they proceeded to buy a completely identical outfit and mask to match the original Thunderfoot. And the best part, we rarely ever see them work tag matches together. It'd be one thing if the Thunderfoots were a recurring tag team on the show. Most of the time, they end up working singles matches. So it makes the whole thing that much more preposterous. Why the fuck did they need 2 Thunderfoots? Made no sense. Jimmy Garvin beat him with a brainbuster. I literally wrote nothing else down. Whenever Jimmy wrestles in these sequin glitter pants, you know it's going to be pretty short. The real talk of the segment was the promo he did afterwards. And they show this in the cold open VTR, but I didn't mention it because I knew they were going to follow up on it later on. Let's start the conversation with this. Remember how I thought that the Raging Bull had already left Crockett Promotions by this point? Much like his counterpart, Rick Rude. Well, turns out I was wrong. He's still around. Go figure. Still aligned with Paul Jones and Ivan Koloff. Still hanging in the backdrop, collecting a paycheck, and probably just buying his time. And now, apparently, in a storyline / program that I guarantee you no one remembers ever happening, even the hardcores that might have their NWA history down packed, the Paul Jones Army, if we can even call them that at this point, have now entered a feud with Jimmy Garvin. Now, I want you all to keep in mind, this is what they had planned for Gorgeous Jimmy after the cage match with Ric Flair, where he wrestled for the World Heavyweight title. He now finds himself immersed in a feud with Ivan Koloff, Manny Fernandez, the Barbarian, and Paul Jones. Possibly Vladimir Petrov, even though I'm still pretty sure that guy was out of the picture by now anyway. It's weird. They keep bringing him up on the TV show, but like, I'm 90% sure he's gone from the promotion by this point. Because he's never on camera. They keep saying his name, but we never physically see him standing there. So I think he left. But they show the video film. It is Ivan and Paul holding down Jimmy while Bull goes up and gives him a series of diving knee stomps from the top rope. And that's obviously targeting the injury that he sustained in the cage match with Flair. And, well, there's a lot of thoughts I had after seeing this. The first one was, Why? Seriously, why? Of all fucking people to feud Jimmy Garvin with, they settled on Paul Jones and his collection of misfit toys. And that's not a shot at anybody in the group. I have nothing against Ivan or Bull or even the Barbarian. But come on. In the general scope of everything we've seen throughout the summer of 1987, you're telling me their game plan, while the Garvins are still in the middle of this red-hot feud with the Four Horsemen, you're now going to pull Jimmy Garvin from the equation and feud him with the likes of Paul Jones and a bunch of mid-card acts who haven't been jack shit in months? He goes from Ric Flair, Tully Blanchard, Arn Anderson, and Lex Luger to Paul Jones. That is one slippery slope downgrade, let me tell you. Can you imagine? That's like taking Cody Rhodes after he's worked main event programs with the likes of Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns, and then his next feud is with the fucking Brawling Brutes. That'd be the lamest shit ever. I mean, for one, I can't imagine the feud goes on that long. Like I said, Bull's on borrowed time anyway. He's already got one foot out the door. The Barbarian hasn't been around in a while. He's rarely even on TV. Ivan's still around, but, I mean, he's not doing anything all that constructive at the moment. So, suffice it to say, not really sold on this feud. So then Nikita Koloff killed David Isley with a sickle in about a minute. It was great, too, because the first spot of the match is Isley ducking the sickle. And then Nikita looked at him like, all right then, fuck you, dude. And he proceeded to beat the crap out of him for like another 50 seconds. Probably would have been better off just taking the sickle and avoiding all the punishment altogether. Yeah, but these studio jobbers were fucking dolts to begin with. They never learn. And then the Rock and Roll Express did a promo. They said they were going to be fighting champions and work hard for all the nice people. That's all I got out of it. And then Nikita was back out for a promo after the break. Well, first he commented on something Cornette mentioned earlier. Maybe I missed it. Something about Corny making fun of Nikita for not having a title. And the only belt Nikita has is the one that holds up his pants. Did I blank out? I don't remember him saying that. I mean, to be fair, Cornette only speaks at about 150 miles per hour. Sometimes things go by pretty rapidly. And then Nikita handed Tony a card with all the list of names that he's beaten for the U.S. title. While Tony's running down guys like Ivan Koloff, Vladimir Pietrov, the Raging Bull, Rick Steiner, among many others, Nikita tells Lex Luger that he can make up all the contracts he wants, and Nikita will always be there to sign on the dotted line. And while Nikita isn't afraid of Luger, he knows that Luger is afraid of him. And while I can neither confirm nor deny that statement, when Nikita looks into the camera with those bug eyes, I fear for any man that's stupid enough to get into the ring with him. And then Barry Windham wrestled David Spearman. Still referencing the Western States Heritage Championship. God. Is it possible for championship belts to have heat? If so, the constant references to this fucking Western States Heritage title driving me nuts. I mean, the belt design's nice, but every time I hear somebody mention that belt name, I'm like, does anyone actually care? It's like when the New Japan guys show up on AEW with belts and you're like, does anybody actually give a fuck who the IWGP United States Heavyweight Champion is? The answer is rhetorical. Of course nobody cares. Anyway, more scintillating note-taking here. Here's everything I wrote down. They wrestled. Barry won with a lariat. Ready to move on? Because I am. Oh, and Barry did a promo after the break, too. Plugged a bunch of towns. Called out. I believe the two names he mentioned were Arn Anderson and Eddie Gilbert. And this is actually one of those deals where Arn was scheduled to wrestle next. So, conveniently, while Barry is cutting the promo on Arn and challenging him to step up to the plate, here comes Arn to trash talk him before he gets into the ring. And I believe Barry says he wants the match to happen in Denver on August 17th. And actually, the match was Arn and Tully in a tag bout. So, before they even rang the bell for this, I knew it was going to be fire. They wrestled Keith Patterson and Dexter Westcott, who I believe at this point may be the two single worst jobbers they have on these studio shows. And think about the ground that covers. Because we've seen some dreck. I can't remember that one guy I buried on the show like 6 months ago. He didn't stick around that long, but he was that frumpy-looking dope that wrestled Rick Rude. Got potatoed and busted open. I think he changed his name a few times. Because that's another thing the job guys did. They would try to change their name to make it seem like we never saw them before. Despite the fact that about 99% of the time, they're wearing the exact same ring gear. But, yeah, that guy was awful. Keith and Dexter were pretty rotten themselves. Hard to tell who's worst of the bunch. Dexter's the guy with the hideous-looking singlet. I can't get over it. For whatever reason, he had the grand idea of settling on two primary colors for his ring gear. Sky blue and piss yellow. And when I say piss yellow, that is no exaggeration. It was not a bright color. It looked like my urine if I didn't drink enough water for the day and was super dehydrated. That was the color of Dexter Westcott's singlet. He wore this on television and thought it was a good idea. Yeah, looking back, he was significantly more appalling than the other guy. Whatever his name was, Keith Patterson. My favorite spot, Tully tags in Arn, and Arn proceeded to give Dexter a boot to the elbow. So then Dexter proceeded to sell, of course, his face. Beautiful. We also had the classic spot where Tully lets the job guys try and throw work jabs at him just to give him something. The problem is that the punches are so fake looking, even Tully can't pretend to sell them without burying his credibility. So Arn hit Patterson with a DDT and then killed him with a gore buster for the 3. It was about as close as you could come to third-degree manslaughter without it being a crime. And then we got JJ, Tully, and Arn at the booth. Oh, actually, before that, Tully and Arn also killed Dexter Westcott with a double-assisted gourd buster. From the camera angle, it was hard to tell whether they dragged him into the ring or if Dexter was actually stupid enough to try and run to fight the Horseman at a 2-on-1 disadvantage. Either way, it was funny. And, well, JJ certainly said some words here. This was one of those going around his elbow to get to his wrist promos where I'm not entirely sure what his point was, but he tried to apply logic somewhere. He talks about all the fancy cars and luxury items that separate the Horsemen from the common people. He also said something about how if you're rich, that means you're also smart. And smart people don't use money to pay for things. They use other people's money to pay for things. Sounds like entrepreneurship 101. They definitely don't teach you that in college. And then Arn did a fiery promo on Barry Windham and the Rock and Roll Express. First, he sends the message to Barry that he's coming for the Western States Heritage Championship. To which I wrote, Arn Anderson may be the first and only wrestler on this show that can get me interested to watch him wrestle and compete for the Western States Heritage Championship. Then he did a great promo on Ricky and Robert, saying that when the Horsemen wrestled them for the belts last time, they had a weak link in the chain, whose head was not in the game, and it cost him the belts. But things are different now, because Arn has Tully as a tag partner, and they've never been more focused than they are right now. That was all well and good. And then Tully stepped in and said, let me take these boys to school in the promo department. First, he made a joke about how Robert Gibson is a horrible fucking promo and nobody understands a goddamn word he ever says. I'm not kidding, that's basically what he said. And then he turns and acknowledges the Horseman fans in the studio today, all of whom are dressed in suits, coats, and ties. Unlike those rock and roll fans in beat-up t-shirts. And that was something I didn't acknowledge, but Tony and David pointed out the crew of well-dressed gentlemen in the front row this week. Dressed in their Walmart-inspired cheap suits and ugly-looking shades to try and mimic the Horsemen. And you know, the more I think about it, there's something so wonderfully brilliant about the visual of dorky young men in horribly fitted suits trying to be the Horsemen. And yet, Flair, Tully, Arn, and Luger and JJ do not give a fuck how ridiculous they look. Because you know what? They're Horseman fans, by golly. And that's all they care about. Regardless of how horrible they look. What a group of heels. Those Horsemen were something else. So yeah, Tully gave him a shout out. And then he promised that he and Arn would become the World Tag Team Champions. 5-star promo segment. And then we came back for a Dusty promo. And, you know, let me just say this before I get into the material. I'm not the kind of guy that likes to openly shame fat people. It's usually kind of obvious when you look at somebody. You can tell whether or not they're in relatively decent shape. Dusty Rhodes was never the guy recognized for having a great body. I think this is universal knowledge. With that said, when he came out to the booth this week in a slim fit gray t-shirt, his nipples are piercing right through the fabric like he's having an erection. This was probably the first time where I sat down and said to myself, my God, that man is extremely fat. He ballooned up very considerably within the last year. Either I didn't notice it as much, or he was wearing enough clothing to cover up for it. Here it was very obvious. That man was, how you say, round, ovular. Now, last week, I think it was last week, may have been the week before. Well, there was a promo that Dusty did where I was convinced that about a third of the entire show was just that one Dusty promo. He was just out there droning on and on and on forever. Never had a point to anything he ever talked about. One of the worst Dusty promos I've ever heard. So I'm thinking he may have been on the same wavelength as me. He said, you know what? Yeah, that promo did kind of suck. So I'm going to go out there this week and do a promo that's like 80 times better. And he certainly didn't disappoint. He's out there talking about his friendship with Nikita, saying that it's a genuine friendship, something that's not bought and paid for. Meanwhile, Lex Luger's out there parading around with the Horsemen like he's something, standing around like he's big time when the reality of the situation is he stole the U.S. heavyweight title from Nikita. Talks about how in Texas they have a saying for guys like Luger. They call them pretty boys. Just like all the pretty boy cosplay horseman fanatics in the front row this week in their fancy suits. They aren't like the common people. They can't relate to blue-collar, hard-working Americans. Everything about them is artificial. It's all bought and paid for. The clothes, the lifestyle, the fancy cars, the personalities. But the difference between Dusty and Luger is that Dusty is also famous. Sure, he can relate to the ordinary common man, but he's also rich. So he can buy and sell Luger with a twist of a pen. A little inside reference to being the Booker man. He also tells Luger that he's nothing more than a, quote, $1 million body with a $1 million pea brain. I presume that's more WWF references. And then to put a cap on it, solidifying this as the greatest Dusty promo of all time, he turns to the gentleman in the front row, those horseman cosplayers, and he tells them, I got 2 words for you. You suck. Gold. Maybe take out some of the insider references to Virgil. This is a 5-star Dusty promo. I will put this up there with Hard Times. I don't care. Dusty was on fucking fire in this promo. I wish this would have been a 45-minute program this week. They could have just ended it right there and be done with it. Because nothing was going to top that promo. No, there were a couple other good promos on this show, but this one was up there. This one was definitely up there. So then, unfortunately, we go from that to Sean Royal versus Ricky Nelson. Now, I referenced it earlier, the Sean Royal singles match. Yes, the new breed is back. Partially. Chris Champion was not present. And if you're wondering where he was, well, there's the kayfabe answer, and then there's the legitimate answer. The kayfabe answer, according to Tony Schiavone, Chris Champion is right beside Sean Royal like he always is. Because, you know, the new breed are time travelers, so they can predict the future. And in the future, Chris Champion is back with Sean Royal as a tag team. In the future. Yeah, this gimmick sucks. Did I ever mention that? Now, the real answer as to why Chris Champion was not around, not to immediately turn this conversation on its head, I believe this was right around the period where Champion had gotten into a car accident. And he was basically on the show for like an entire year. And I don't think Sean Royal stuck around much longer in the business. So, yeah, the new breed, for all intents and purposes, was pretty much over. Now, they're still referencing them on the TV show, but, yeah, that was a short-lived run. They debuted in '86, did nonsensical psychobabble promos about the future. Their matches were lousy. And then they broke up less than a year later. What a run. This match was fucking horrible, by the way. Sean Royal at one point had Nelson in a fake submission hold while he was cutting promos on Jimmy Valiant. And when I say fake submission hold, he basically had him like he was going for the sharpshooter, but instead of turning him on his back, he just stood there grapevining Nelson by his legs, and Nelson was basically upside down on his head for like a minute. I'm not entirely sure what he was working. Was he going after a body limb? Was he just trying to knock Nelson unconscious? I don't know. I have no idea what that guy was doing. And then he totally botched the finish by trying to hit Nelson with a diving knee drop. And I watched the slow-mo replay like 6 times. He basically clipped Nelson's chest with the toe of one boot, and the rest of his body completely overshot him. In bold letters, I wrote down the following: dreadful. Speaking of dreadful, Paul Jones was out for a promo with Ivan Koloff. He's talking about the Road Warriors and the international titles. More unrecognized belts on this show that we rarely see and have no reason to care about. Jones said that he's putting together the Dream Busters tag team of Ivan Koloff and Vladimir Pietrov. A team that probably lasted shorter than the New Breed. Like I said, I'm almost positive Pietrov left the company by this point, but then again, I thought the Raging Bull had left. But he's still floating around. Anyway, he's instructed Ivan and Pietrov to, quote, do the job to the Road Warriors. No joke, that's what he said. And then he tried to course correct by saying, get the job done. But, I think he kind of let the cat out of the bag. And then Ivan said some stuff. I didn't write a single thing down. Totally blanked out. And then Ron Garvin wrestled the other Thunderfoot. I think it was 2 earlier, so by proxy of elimination, I guess this would have been Thunderfoot number 1. Probably should have written that down. This is great. Ronnie's in there doing his thing. And I'm like flabbergasted. They've never thought of this until just now. While Ronnie is on the mat stretching this guy, they cut to a shot of a young kid in the crowd who's totally immersed in everything he's watching. Probably thinking to himself, what is this man doing to this poor masked guy? I can only imagine what that child was going through watching Ronnie stretch and fold this guy up like a pretzel. At one point, Ronnie had Thunderfoot basically in a cradle pin. And I think he may have had him down for a shoot pin because Thunderfoot was desperately trying to roll his shoulder up to kick out of this fucking pinfall. And I think Ronnie had to finally roll him over to avoid accidentally pinning him. They also totally killed the loaded boot spot. They sandwiched Teddy in the corner so Thunderfoot can give Ronnie some boots to the gut. They're trying to sell it like he loaded the boot up. Because, you know, that's the gimmick. So, of course, 3 seconds later, Ronnie just fires back and knocks him out with a punch. Great gimmick spot. And then, as I wrote down here, Ronnie Garvin cut the best promo of his entire career. Boy, let me tell you something about these Ronnie Garvin promos. They sure turned around for the better. Dude, you don't believe me? Go back and listen to those promos he was doing in '86. We recapped them. If you were to ask me, who was the bottom of the barrel in terms of promo ability? Hands down, I would have said Ronnie Garvin. His promos were the shits. I don't know where he got that spark of energy from. I don't know who was lighting a fire under his ass. But these Ronnie Garvin promos over the last few months have been outstanding. And really, if you think about it, he didn't say a whole lot. He talked about how Flair is either stupid or cocky to try and target Garvin up front. Considering how many times he's knocked him out in the last year, Garvin's bent on him just being plain stupid. He said that when he was a young boy, He always set out with the goal to be the best at any profession or challenge put in front of him. He's held a lot of belts. He's traveled across the country and done many great things. But there's one thing he hasn't done. He hasn't won the big one yet. He wants the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. He did some proud to be an American spiel. But he had a great closer where he said that very few men in the last 20 years have held that prestigious world title. It's been a long, treacherous road for Ronnie to get to this point. God, he ain't lying. How long has he been pursuing Flair for the gold? Going on 2 years almost? But he said, now's the time. Flair wanted to be Uncle Sam and say, Garvin, I want you. Well, motherfucker, you're getting him. And it's coming in the form of a knockout punch to the face. God. I almost wanted to reach through the screen and shake Ronnie's hand. This promo, I think this is what sold them on running with Ronnie as a champion for a short period. They still may have been contemplating it to this point. Not after this fucking promo, they weren't. Ronnie Garvin earned that title reign after this one. It's phenomenal. It may have outclassed the Ric Flair promo that followed. That's how damn good it was. And this was a considerably good Flair promo, too. Well, first he gave a shout out to his boys in the front. Man, those men were the shining stars on this episode of Crockett TV. They should have signed those guys as job fodder to see if they could work. I mean, if they were Horseman fans, they were probably better than the majority of the idiots they brought in to work these squashes. They probably actually watched wrestling footage before they put a pair of boots and trunks on. Anyway, so Flair's doing the promo on Ronnie, telling him that he's great, he's tough, he's done a lot of impressive things in this sport, but he's walking into the lion's den with Flair, and he's not ready to handle that kind of pain and pressure. And yeah, he still wants a piece of Garvin. After that little stunt he tried to pull in the hotel room, Flair's got a receipt coming. But it's not just about getting revenge for Flair. He also wants to retire Ronnie and end his professional wrestling career. That's almost unheard of. To think that Ronnie Garvin outdid Ric fucking Flair on the microphone. But I think he may have. Flair was good this week, but Garvin blew Flair out of the water. Brilliant stuff from both men. Not to undersell Rick here. This also would have been a great close to the show. They didn't have another 13 minutes left of airtime. And then we go back to the ring for Lex Luger versus Alan Martin, where David Crockett spent the majority of it fangirling over Luger's body. A Greek god, he called him. Yeah. He didn't wrestle like a Greek god, but he definitely had the body of one. I'll give him that. Luger did 100 power moves and then one with the torture rack. And then he and JJ did a promo at the booth. I gotta be honest, I have no idea what the fuck JJ said. Something about Lloyd's of London and how Dusty walked through the front door of their headquarters, he would get laughed out of the building. Yeah, I have no idea. This is not a quality week for J.J. Dillon promos. I did like, though, right before he pitched to Luger so he could chime in, JJ's firing up and talking about how he's in the business of protecting Luger because he's a valuable asset to the sport. Then he turns to Luger and goes, "I'm sorry, sir. He got me all fired up." That was awesome. And Luger's plugging the dating game thing, which I I'm kind of hoping we get footage of at some point, just to see the awkwardness. He also did a Spitfire promo on Nikita and Dusty. He used a lot of fancy words, mumbled over himself a few times. He emphasized random phrases in the middle of his dialogue, like he always does. And then he flexed and went, yeah. That's all I got. So, well, you know how it goes sometimes. You're watching the shows, they usually start to drag a little bit by the second hour. You kind of have a little less patience for bullshit the longer the show runs on. When I saw the next match was Ivan Koloff versus Dale Laperhouse. God, I wish I were making that name up. Dude, I nearly lost it. I'm like, you're kidding, right? We're over an hour in. There's like 5 minutes left of airtime. And someone decided to send Ivan Koloff out there to wrestle a job guy for 8 hours. The only thing that made up for it was me sitting there and laughing at Dale Laperhouse's god-awful body. This guy made Kendall Windham look like fucking Road Warrior Animal. Just a generic, pale, buggy-whipped arm doofus with a porn stash. He looked like a registered offender in some municipality. Holy shit. Hideous. God-awful. Ivan killed him with a sickle. That was followed with Ricky Morton coming back out and essentially issuing an open challenge to Tully Blanchard. He said Tully was out here running his yapper earlier, trying to give the Rock and Roll Express a bad name. So Ricky took it upon himself to get dressed for a fight. He knows he can out-wrestle and out-maneuver Tully anytime. So if he's got the guts, he can come meet Ricky in the ring for a fight right now. So of course they cut the break. But it was a perfect segue into the final segment. Even the NWA was not about to rid me with this one. When they put up a graphic on screen that read, Ralph Rubio versus the White Raider, the first thing I said was, oh, fuck no. There's no way that's happening. We've already seen Sean Royal and Ivan Koloff go out there and bore the brakes off of everybody. They're not about to let two interchangeable job guys work a real TV match, right? Well, you'll be happy to know we were relieved of that sheer atrocity. To be fair, they didn't have anybody in the ring. They just had the names on screen before zooming in on all the pretty boys in the front row. Maybe that was the rib. Maybe they were wrestlers after all. One of them was named Ralph, and the other was named, I don't know, Raider. Well, we didn't get the match. Instead, we had Ricky confront Tully at the booth, bitch slap him across the face as hard as humanly possible, and then we had the greatest impromptu fight of all time. The bitch slap heard across the nation, and the look on Tully's face told the story. He looked at Ricky and said, all right, fucker, let's go. So Ricky waves him into the ring, and he and Tully proceed to have the hottest, wildest brawl in the history of Crockett Promotions. Ricky's a house of fire in there. Tully's bumping around like crazy. People are throwing babies in the air. They're so out of control. He had Robert Gibson show up and throw Tully back into the ring when he was trying to escape. And then at my favorite moment of the show, something that is so beyond stupid, all you can do is laugh at the absurdity of it. As Ricky Morton goes to roll up Tully and a schoolboy for a 2 count in a match that was not even sanctioned. I died. There's no referee, but the crowd's there to count, damn it. So, Tully's instincts kicked in. He wasn't having it. In this impromptu, non-sanctioned match that was not a match at all, Tully Blanchard still had to kick out of a flash roll-up. This was the peak of Crockett Promotions. It was all downhill from that point forward. So, finally they send Teddy out there to officiate, I guess. By that point, they only had like a minute left of airtime. So, of course, right as Ricky goes to tackle Tully and go for the pin, you hear Tony go, "Fans, we're out of time. We'll see you next week." And meanwhile, David Crockett, the biggest mark in the history of wrestling, shouts to the top of his lungs, "Ricky's going for the pin!" God, I love this show. It's so great. This might have been the best moment of 87. I was really souring on the show right up until the final segment, but they turned it around for me. Oh, this is so legendary. I don't think I will ever forget, for as long as I live, the moment Tully fucking Blanchard kicked out of a schoolboy in a non-match. That right there. That's why I still love wrestling. For moments like that. I cried tears of joy. Oh, this is excellent. Tie that in with the Flair Garvin promos. I almost forgot about how horrible the rest of the show was this week. Imagine that. 3 standout great moments totally overshadowed the 17 other bad things on the show this week. Oh, yeah, the Dusty promo too. That was fantastic. Can't neglect to mention that. Yeah, take those out of the equation. The show is no good. Still only about an hour in runtime. Yeah, but that fatigue factor was definitely kicking in the last 15 minutes. This is, well, it's a rough patch we're about to enter in the next 6 to 12 months. They're about to sell to Turner in the fall of 88. And we're seeing those cracks get bigger and wider with each passing week. Once that sale goes through, it's just a steep downward trajectory from there. So let's try to enjoy the moments while we can. Because the great ones are few and far between from now until, well, I guess once we start entering the dark stages of WCW. I mean, we're already in the dark stages of world class. And it shows with each passing episode. It's not like unbearably unwatchable or anything. Far from it. But man, talk about swimming up Schitt's Creek without a paddle. That they're about to lose the Freebirds for a period of time. Which basically leaves the Von Erichs with scraps in terms of people to feud with. You know, Kerry's been doing the thing with Gino. Poor Kevin's stuck feuding with Killer fucking Khan. God, talking about drawing the short straw. And then there's Mike, who I actually forgot existed. Like, he's been such a non-entity on the show. Working some occasional tag matches with his brothers, but, I mean, he's not really involved in anything big or important. You know, speaking of Killer Khan and the rest of Devastation Inc., they're still around, for one. The group's been through a lot of incarnations, but I think we've hit a low point. Because now the group basically consists of the General, the Missing Link, God help us all, Killer Khan. I think the Irwin brothers are still associated. Yeah, this faction kind of blows. They need King Kong Bundy back. Or Kamala. That's the last time I remember this group being what you would call relevant. Or at least had some form of star power. I mean, they've been through a lot of personnel changes. But here we are in the summer of '84, and this is what we're left with. An underneath heel team that never wins. A giant oriental mute who screams a lot and has like 2 moves. And a guy whose gimmick is that he's a mental patient who has CTE. Did I mention this group sucks? And now, apparently, all of a sudden, from literally out of the blue, the Freebirds are now feuding with them. Thus making them kind of baby faces when they already have 1 foot out the door. We had one of those inset VTRs at Fort Worth where Skandar Akbar is running down the Freebirds. It's one of the most random out-of-the-blue promos where, for literally no reason, with 0 prior backstory, Devastation Inc. just decided to enter a program with the Freebirds. Akbar is calling Hayes an idiot for letting Killer Khan slip through his fingers when they had a chance to make him their bodyguard or muscle. Because remember back, I think it was the David Memorial show in May of this year where Khan debuted in Dallas and he got into a brawl with the Von Erichs after that 6-man with them and the Freebirds. And Killer Khan had been aligned with Hayes, Gordy, and Buddy until, though basically 1 week he was just hanging out with Skandar Akbar. There was really no context to it. So, of course, Hayes is pissed off that the general's calling him out. So he comes out to confront him, calls the general pigface, tells him to take back his comments about the Freebirds, elsewise Hayes is going to dick Akbar in the face. It's that southern accent creeping in, I guess. So, of course, they time-lapse a few seconds to where Hayes is trying to fend off Link and Khan by himself until Khan goes to put the oriental spike on him, and Hayes powders. That was part 1 of the timeline. Then we go to a tag match later in that show where Kerry and Kevin are wrestling Link and Khan. And while the match is in progress, here come Hayes and Gordy to hit the ring to start brawling with, well, I was going to say Killer Khan and Missing Link, but they also disposed of the Von Erichs momentarily, which did not go well for the Freebirds, because then it just turned into a 3-way with all 6 guys. And it was one of those rare instances in wrestling where the attention to story detail is kind of key. If they shot this angle in 2023 and they were flipping the Freebirds' face, it would not have mattered if they would have spent the last 2 years feuding with the Von Erichs. They'd have been fighting and working on the same page immediately like it was nothing. But the Freebirds got their revenge on Devastation Inc. briefly, but at the same time, the Von Erichs started fighting with the Freebirds because, well, fuck. They just cost them the match, and they still hate them. There's still beef there. That all didn't magically go away. So it actually made sense. A rare instance where I'm actually okay for a 3-way tag team match. I don't think we ever get it, but I mean, if you're going to do multi-man matches in wrestling, this is a logical, coherent way to go about it. So even though the story is the Freebirds are mad at Devastation Inc. and want to rip their heads off, they still have their ongoing problems with the Von Erichs, so they're not going to immediately dismiss it like it's nothing. And then we cut to Akbar's closing thoughts, another one of those pre-tape promos. And he's there talking about how he knows the universal language. Money. As he pulls out a wad of $100 bills from his coat pocket and starts flaunting it in front of the camera. Talks about how that half-wit Gordy allowed Killer Khan to master and use the Oriental Spike. And with the Spike and Missing Link's unpredictability, the Devastation Inc. will never be stopped. I liked his heel line where he told Hayes, "You better quit the studio recording sessions and prepare for battle. Because this is business." He was such a ominous, dark figure, that Skandar Akbar. But that was more or less a long-winded way of recapping the big story in World Class right now. And let that sink in for a minute if you can process that. The Missing Link and Killer Khan. The top two heels in Dallas at the moment feuding with the top babyfaces. Well, they're not the Four Horsemen. We'll just leave it at that. So following it, we got the greatest moment in all of wrestling. If this is not the greatest moment, it is certainly up there. A high point in the career of Terry Gordy. That is for sure. So we get Bill Mercer in a pre-recorded segment out in the parking lot. He's hanging out outside the Freebirds van. Of course, it's one of those hippy-dippy Ford vans from like the 70s with the goofy paint job. And we get Hayes coming out doing a very super passionate promo, talking about how they brought Killer Khan into the country, tried to show him a good time. They took him sightseeing and tried to befriend him. But what did he do? He sold out for money. And that's fine with the Freebirds because he can make his own decisions. Now keep in mind, the entire time this is going on, Bill Mercer's asking if he can get a word with Gordy, but Hayes keeps telling him that he's in a bad mood and he doesn't want to come out of the van right now. So like a goddamn fool, Mercer proceeds to open the side door and out pops Terry Gordy, who is, for lack of better terms, high as a fucking kite. He's doing this crazy loom bat promo. Probably the best Ric Flair impersonation you'll ever see without him blatantly trying to rip off Flair. He's talking about how it's a free country and if Gordy wants to bring Killer Khan into any city he wants, he can. In fact, Gordy can do anything he wants. If he wants to take a whiff of snuff, spit it on the ground, he will. I also failed to mention, while Gordy is berating Mercer for interrupting his high, Gordy tells him not to put his hands on the van. As Gordy proceeds to walk over and smack the shit out of the door frame like 6 times in a row. It was at this point that I determined this man is either shooting or he's doing the best worked lunatic promo of all time. And the peak of this segment happens as Gordy rips off his t-shirt in hysterics, does a Ric Flair flop on the concrete, begins to have what I can merely describe as a seizure. All the while, Bill Mercer, deadpan, pauses and goes, well, he's clearly upset. I have no clue how the fuck anybody kept a straight face here. Hayes in particular, knowing the kind of guy Gordy was, I honestly wouldn't be surprised if Bill Mercer feared for his life. When Gordy's freaking out and spitting in his face, this giant behemoth of a man telling him not to touch the van, making threats, Bill Mercer calmly and soothingly goes, "Yes, sir." Gordy put the fear of God in this man, no doubt. This is awesome. The only thing missing was Gordy getting up in front of the camera and wooing to the top of his lungs. The shows are off the rails, but Gordy made it all worthwhile in that 45-second pre-tape. And then unfortunately we had to go back to the Sportatorium for the rest of the card. And I'm sorry to say, Scott Hogg Irwin versus Rick McCord, not as great as crazy off-the-wall Terry Gordy and Michael Hayes. I know, hard to believe, right? Yes, Scott Irwin putting Rick McCord in a front facelock for 5 minutes was not as entertaining as the Freebirds being the Freebirds. This was another one of those heat matches where Scott would occasionally do a big power move, and then he would immediately grab a hold, like 3 seconds later. Power slam, put him in a headlock. Back body drop, front face lock. Drag him into the corner for an illegal choke, immediately put him back in a headlock. Shockingly, the only points where the crowd cared were during Rick McCord's 5-second comeback, and then Irwin cut him off with a knee to the gut, followed it with a super suplex for the 3 count. And I remind you all, these are quality prelim matches that we were getting in World Class in 1984. My God, the Midnight Express could not debut soon enough. And then Killer Khan wrestled Kevin Von Erich. They've actually been building up to this one behind the scenes for a while. They shot that hospital pre-tape with Chick Donovan and Kevin a few weeks ago after Khan had done a heavy amount of ligament damage to poor Chick. So Kevin's been out for blood. And boy, you want to talk about having a match with a guy with 2 left feet. They may as well have just had Kevin go out there and wrestle a mannequin. I think the mannequin would have been less stiff. And the whole match was built around Kevin trying to avoid the spike. So they would tease it occasionally, but Kevin would fight back and try to get the claw hold on Khan. And he eventually did. They milked that for a few minutes until Hayes ran in for the blatant DQ. Another case where Kevin and Hayes traded blows with Devastation Inc., but weren't necessarily working on the same page. It was one of those angles where they both took turns pulling each other off of Khan until finally Missing Link ran in, after which the heels finally took a powder, and Hayes turned around and said, "All right, fuck it." And then he and Kevin started going at it. Poor Freebirds can never catch a break. They always lost the 1-2 exchange with the Von Erichs. It's universal. The tropes of professional wrestling that still reign true in 2023. Ric Flair should never try to go to the top rope. You don't throw punches with Hogan when he's hulking up. You don't try to powerbomb Billy Kidman. And the Freebirds should never try to brawl with the Von Erichs, because they always lose. And then for the main event, Hayes and Roberts versus Chris Adams and Mike Von Erich. Reaching for any combination of Von Erichs versus Freebirds pairings we're yet to see. And of course, the weird thing here, now the Freebirds are back to being full-fledged heels. The same Dallas faithful that were screaming and cheering for Hayes when he was out there trying to take the fight to Skandar Akbar, now they're chanting, "Go home Freebirds," in the main event. These people were never satisfied. Match was fine. It's kind of your prototypical Dallas TV main event. Got a lot of time, so they worked the various heat angles throughout and tried to space them out between Adams and Mike so they could both do hot tags. Bill Mercer mentioned here that in the coming weeks, we were going to see 2 debuting faces, one of which we've actually seen on Dallas TV before, but he was wrestling under a mask. And obviously I'm talking about Jake the Snake Roberts. He will now be returning to the territory as Jake Roberts. The other name, I'm not sure how many people would be familiar with him. Skip Young. I can understand if people wouldn't recognize the name. Again, probably doesn't ring a bell for a lot of people, but if I throw in Sweet Brown Sugar as the nickname, if you know your Florida wrestling history, Sweet Brown Sugar was actually Skip's name when he was wrestling under a mask. He and Butch Reed, I think they worked as a tag team for a period. It's another one of those names that was a little before my time, so, I can't sit here and run down his entire backstory in 30 seconds. His Florida work is more memorable than a lot of other places he worked throughout his career. Another guy, though, that I don't think was around the business for a great length of time. By the time the territories fizzled out, he was another name that just sort of dropped off the market and never resurfaced. I think he finished up his career in Florida. But, yeah, those are at least a couple standout names. Well, more so than some of the recent ones we've seen pop up. They're a hell of a lot more notable than Rock and Roll Buck Zumhoff or fucking Chief Joel Strongbow. Anyway, oh yeah, the match. Guess we were still talking about that. Like I said, it's all very basic scientific stuff. Mike Von Erich is improving. That's very faint praise considering that he was a far cry from anything remotely good. Competent, maybe. It did pick up in the last few minutes. In addition, we had some great camera work where they proceeded to try and show replays of previous moves while guys were getting bumped and knocked around during the live action. They missed Buddy getting knocked out to the floor. I think they missed Mike giving Hayes a super kick. I will say, the one impressive thing Mike Von Erich does that I don't see a lot of other workers do, the head scissors takeover from the ring apron, over the top rope, back into the ring. Now, we've seen Kevin do it, but Mike pulled it off. And that's not an easy move to execute. And of course, you fast forward to the last minute or so, it just turns into a schmoz where everybody's hitting a bunch of moves and trying to counter everything back and forth. All four guys are in there fighting. They do the double bonk spot with the heels, which directly leads to Hayes and Buddy hitting a double clothesline on Adams. So not only do they no-sell the bonk spot, but they also stole MJF and Adam Cole's finish 30-something years into the future. And they did a series of pinfall breakups until I think it was Mike that came in and pulled Adams over so he could cradle Buddy Roberts and pin him. It was fun. Probably not as good as the Gino Carey match from the other week, but still a good match. You know, they're keeping Mike in tag situations right now, which is a wise decision. It's helping him stay in the background and learn on the job, while, you know, letting him stay active and keep his feet wet. The progression rate of how much better he's actually getting, that's kind of up in the air. Yeah, but he held his own. Buddy did the job again. No surprise there. You know, and I like the short afterbirth where the heels tried to jump Mike and Chris. They went to set up the double pile driver, but the babyfaces fended them off and avoided all that. It's, you know, again, it's one of those weird oddball storytelling things where I thought the Freebirds were babyfaces. I guess except for when they're still wrestling the Von Erichs and then they're heels because, well, I mean, nobody's going to boo the Von Erichs in Dallas. You kidding? I mean, they could punt a newborn baby into the front row and they would still get cheered. But yeah, the dynamics of the Freebirds in World Class is really strange. I guess you could call them tweeners if you're into that new age speak of modern wrestling where Mark's trying to make up terms and stick to them like they're actual things. But, oh yeah, and Mike did a promo too. It was, bad. One of those promos where he tries to throw out like 8 talking points but never actually concludes any of them. Something about Adams being okay. Something about them going after the Freebirds and the 6-man belts. Something about how his brothers will be there next week, and that was pretty much it. It was actually a pretty good show. This week wasn't too bad in comparison to what I've seen over the last couple months. Pretty much everything post-Texas Stadium. You know, they're trying something with the main event picture right now. The Freebirds were on fire this week. That Terry Gordy promo, I don't think I'll forget that for a long time. Good main event, too. Solid offering. Not a blow-away show, but definitely a vast improvement in comparison to what I've seen them do lately. I'll take this one as a positive. So, cool. Kind of a longer show this week, but yeah, that's all right. Sometimes I get a little knee-deep into the classic reviews and I just go off. We'll be going off this weekend. I got a lot of stuff to track. So, as noted, I'm not going to be doing a SmackDown report for the Monday show, so take that off your radar. We'll do Retro Raw, we'll do AEW Collision, and then we also got SummerSlam. I'm not going to do a preview for it, but that is tomorrow, I believe, right? Yeah, August 5th. I got that on my calendar here. So we'll see what they offer there. I still prefer the Saturday night pay-per-views over the Sunday night pay-per-views, so keep doing it. Anyway, thanks for watching, everybody. Take care, and I'll catch you on Monday. Peace out.